allows you to enjoy the talk. All the time that I have in front of a microphone like this, I feel as if I was, I don't know, at the European Commission, and I'm gonna say something very serious, although I'm not sure I can live up to these self-imposed expectations. But we are gonna talk about subjectivities, whatever it means. I think it was also a title to kind of bring together different provocations. So what we are gonna try to do with this panel is to propose some work in progress ideas and indeed speculation. So we're gonna make quite short intervention, and we hope that this can lead to a discussion either after our speaker's contribution or over a glass of Prosecco that sooner or later will arrive for us all. So we just need to hold on. This is the penultimate panel. You have made it almost. Okay, so to entertain you today, we have Alberto Cosso from the University of Leicester. He's a sociologist, he's studying digital finance, and currently is flirting with the idea of pleasure and the pleasure society, and whether is it possible to change the world with pleasure instead of apocalypse. So in a way, it is a dialectic relationship with our guru here, Prof. Adam Arvidsson, who's Dr. Gloom, and we know, I mean, those of us that have been around Adam Arvidsson for a while, we know that the end of virtually all his talk is, and the world is gonna end. So today, Alberto is trying to say, well, maybe not. And then we have Aris Komporozos Anastasiou, almost, Athanasiou, sorry. Aris Komporozos Athanasiou. You know, I asked him, how do I pronounce your name? And I repeated twice, and then I got it wrong. So I ask for your solidarity. Okay, from the University College London, you heard from him already this morning. So he's gonna contribute to the discussion by responding to what Alberto and I will talk about in relation to his own theorization and undergoing research. Without further ado, let's start with Alberto Cosso with a talk that has the best title ever, which is Revolutionaries Without Joy. Alberto.
Wow, it's, now I'm supposed to sing and dance, I guess, right?
You can, it's a era. You can.
I feel like the third wheel here. I feel I should just go sit and watch you guys.
So I guess I have... I mean, yeah, no, we can also do a choreography. We can improvise a social choreography, which apparently it's the biggest, one of the biggest trends. So, I mean, where does it come from? First of all, thank you for the beautiful introduction. Thank you, Adam, for organizing this. Thank you for listening to us. Yeah, Alanis Morissette. So, so the idea that I'd like to talk to you about, which I'm not really sure about, is that after liquid modernity, after neoliberalism, after apocalypse, after doom scrolling, I'm tempted to see that there is definitely, and it's been theorized already, a part of a society of enjoyment, right? Negatively enjoying, obsessively, addicting, delusional, private, nihilistic. What I'm trying to put forward, I'm not really sure if it's on a solid ground, is that if there is the possibility of an affirmative politics which is based on this very slippery notion of pleasure, it's a very temporary placeholder. It's very problematic. I know Lacanians, psychoanalysts will say, what are you talking about, pleasure? Let's start from one anecdote from Giovanotti. The Italian people know about Giovanotti. For those who don't know Giovanotti, exactly. I mean, Giovanotti has praised third world advocacy like Mother Teresa, Che Guevara. So he's been a super progressive guy for at least, perceived as such, for 3 decades. Last year, after the pandemic, he was organizing some gigs in the beaches. And apparently the gigs and the noise and the stage would have put in danger some birds who could have, go there to nest. And environmentalists, a new generation of environmentalists, not the WWF, the old institutional side of environment, were completely fine. They say, you're good to go, this is the best we can do, right? And say, this is not enough. Actually, maybe we should stop doing it, right? Why spoiling beaches and natural environment to do such a thing, right? I guess I was moved last year, right? I was supposed to write an article, but I was too lazy, like Calcutta, and an Italian artist. I was expected to produce an album, but I didn't write about that. But I keep thinking about that, and I was extending the thinking, okay, if that has impact, and therefore, according to some people, we should not do that, what should we do that? And should we do concerts only in the parking lots? Maybe. Or maybe we should avoid doing concerts at all, right? Maybe we should avoid pleasure at all. Maybe we should just close ourselves and hope that we're not impacting too much or we're breathing too much air. I know it can sound very problematic, but it's like, okay, what is the boundary then? When are we having a good impact or no impact? I think there's something about sustainability and joy, right? The catastrophe and affirmative humanity on the other side. And there's one part of the doom catastrophe thing, which is a wide discourse that has taken a particular shape. And the second part relates to media, a brief history. I remember, as we've mentioned today, Facebook was a great arena in the beginning. Okay, it's going to revitalize democracy. Beautiful, amazing. Now there is only my aunt and your mother on Facebook commenting and trolling people on vaxxers, and Michelle Bowens. So this was great euphoria about media, and unfortunately there is Manuel Castells who wrote the book about how it's going to change contention, and Adam, you also wrote a book you disagreed with about the ethical economy. You famously said that you were too enthusiastic in the beginning, but and now I think there is great disillusion with traditional media and democracy, and as Umberto Eco said, only it gave voice to many problematic aspects, misinformation, disinformation. So during the lockdown, coming to the modern media, I spent 2 years on TikTok. I know life is short and those years will not come back. I'm thinking about the mirror neurons. I'm thinking about what people do. I mean, people are not interested in democracy. The world is collapsing. There are 70% of the periodic table which is inserted in these things, and we scroll TikTok during our breaks from work. And what do we get from there? What did I got from there, right? I think I theorize this kind of vicarious pleasure, which is this idea about seeing people doing things, achieving things, which is still a very productivist, work-related ethic. I see people in 2 minutes making the most elaborate honey or the most elaborate wine in this accelerated timeline. And we get this feeling, these dopamines. Some people say that's digital crack cocaine, TikTok. Less expensive probably. But and this idea about ACMR and sensation, this aspect of perception. I remember Zimmel talking about the sociology of the senses and how particular periods of capitalist or society are particularly connected to certain senses over others. I think of smell in the metropolis of the early days, right? And the distances and the sight was dominated by the sight and the distances we had from other people and the detachment. So we have these pleasures, these sensational pleasures. So my provisional title for the book before was By Meaning, Welcome Sensation. So this idea that meaning on Facebook, building a digital public sphere, democratic, enabling, was gone. And then we have this element in which pleasure can be seen as in this way as a numbing strategy to cope with the collapse of the world or the narrative of the collapse of the world. We see beautiful, pristine places. We see people doing all kind of ancient jobs. I got so fascinating in people cleaning carpets, in people shoeing horses, and we'd be like 2 minutes of people like doing this, and I wonder why people take breaks. I remember I chat why people take breaks from work, and they look at the telephone and they look at people doing things, right? And they derive this weird pleasure. So, if we go and open a little bracket about how we are built, how we're unconscious of our desires, what about the pleasure principle? It's maybe a delusion. We are seeking pleasure, but it's always elusive. We never get there. Our desires are never satisfied. And there's interesting readings about why do we tweet, for example. And there is this book, The Twitter Machine. It says, actually, we tweet because we cannot stand the idea that we have to die. And then probably it's like, we do that, right? So we have this self-destructing element, and it steals us time, and this negative pleasure, this is the negative pleasure of it, right? So we have the illusion, that idea that we can follow pleasure and reach it. So that is the part which I think is pretty much shared in the analysis, if I think of Halfie Bound, the society of enjoyment. So what if we try and go beyond catastrophe? And that's the point I'm trying to do. So we are pleasure seekers, distracting ourselves from an abrupt end. It implies a certain negative desires, but what I wonder, was I contend, is that what if pleasure could be more, we could understand more than a nihilistic, private, delusional category, and sustain a new, joyful politics, right? I remember David Graeber doing an ethnography of Negri, Lazzarato, conference in London 2008, and the title was The Sadness of Post-Workerism. So I could say that there is a sadness of this new environmentalism, and I think sometimes the frame in which environmental catastrophe is presented, it is a paralyzing fear effect. And what is beyond there? Why should we stop doing what we do? What is next? What is the affirmative desire? What are we going to do after we saved a lot of energy and batteries? What are we going to do exactly? And so I'm leaning towards and building on the work that Angela Jones, a black feminist scholar from New York, she's starting to theorize sociology of pleasure. There has been sociology of leisure, there has been sociology of emotions, and she starts from coming. So this idea that people do online sex and they sell it. In a traditional frame, it's clearly alienating. You're selling your body for money. Bad idea. But her research says that actually people are ultimately happy with it, and they're making good money with it. So I wonder that, and she starts how pleasure is embedded into this. People doing all sorts of practices and feeling fulfilled as well. I know, objection, false conscience. But let's stay with me for the last bit. So, and she says, and I quote here and I finish, is that she's a sex worker as well, and she tells a story about how she was having sex with a customer 30 years senior than her in the back of the workplace. So there was this idea of having sex, which was pleasurable, and this idea that she made money out of it, and that she broke the rules out of it. So there's like fulfilling simultaneously the capitalist imperative to work and make money, yet doing it in a way deemed socially unacceptable by society. So I'm finding inspirations here, and I would say that probably we need to go beyond conservative Marxism in this way, and I'm surprised. I reread Mark Fisher and his critique of hippies and drugs and transcendentalism, and how it basically, he says, they were guilty of passively and mindlessly giving in to the pleasure principle, and the price of such happiness was the sacrifice of all autonomy. So what I contend is that probably there is some autonomy to be gained from there, and there is affirmative joy in politics that we can regain from another gaze beyond catastrophe. And that's my provocation. Thank you.
Thank you. And now that's me. I'm Carolina Bandinelli. I work at the University of Warwick. And recently, in the last maybe few years, 7 years or so, I've been thinking about love. To be fair, I've been thinking about love since I was a child, and I really wanted a dog to love me more than it would love other people in my family. It never really got there, but now I have a cat that I think she does, but with cats it's difficult to tell. And then when I was a teenager, I was reading Roland Barthes, The Fragments of a Lover's Discourse, and I was in love with love. And the idea of love that I had, that I grew up with, is romantic love. What is romantic love? Romantic love, well, Foucault would say, is the combination of emotional intimacy and sexual passion. So it's passionate love. It's not only about passion, it's also about the power of love to disrupt the ego, to disrupt the integrity of the self, and to disrupt the order of the world. So can you put the timer here? Thank you. So love in this respect is an event. Slavoj Žižek says that an event is something that has the power to change the narrative about what has happened before and about what happens next. So love is a transcendental experience in a way that exposes the individual to a surplus of truth, but that truth is also uncanny. That truth is also, to an extent, a threat for the status quo. And I was seeking love everywhere, this kind of love. And that was going wrong a lot of times, because at the same time, I grew up in the 90s, and there was this kind of the aftermath of feminism, which led, as Angela McRobbie would say, amongst others, to this post-feminist ethos for which being an emancipated woman or young woman go through exercising one's sexual power by means of an adventurous sexual life for the sake of experience. So the more you could have sex, the more men I could seduce, the better, according to this narrative. It is what in America, in the US, is called the hookup culture. So I was split, because on the one hand there was the hookup culture, and I wanted to follow the script in a good way because I wanted to be cool and recognized as such. And I also enjoyed it to an extent. Yet on the other hand, I wanted Roland Barthes love. I wanted, Flaubert. Because I didn't read The Irony of Emma Bovary back then. I wanted Anna Karenina. So I was split between these double injunction, like a cultural dilemma. How can I be this but also that? That led to a lot of confusion. Eva Illutz in Why Love Hurts expand on this. And she says, well, love does not hurt only because we are not good enough. Because this is how I felt. I felt like I'm not good enough. He doesn't like me enough. I went wrong. I chose wrongly. In fact, the very fact that choosing is the dispositive through which we find love is in itself part of an ideology of what Eva Illus called the capitalist love. So Eva Illus, but also Ulrich Beck, Giddens, and other sociologists have flagged up this impossible demand on which the subject was subjected, sorry for the pun, and that created its malaise. Because eventually it turned out that, the sex, yes, the sexual revolution freed sex and love from the grip of traditional morale, the family and religion, yet this freedom, the signifier freedom, was kind of easily subsumed and co-opted in a very neoliberal notion of freedom as the capacity of choosing. And the hookup is a highly marketized, reputational field that created patterns of exclusions. So at some point, when I read those books, when I read Eva Illutz, when I read Giddens, when I read Beck, I was like, oh, okay, that was not entirely my fault then. That was good news. after all, love is not only a matter of the individual. After all, love, it's also a cultural construct. Jane Austen love, in Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth fall in love with Mr. Darcy after they had hung out a couple of times with other people, and then she decides to marry him. If a friend of mine would tell me this kind of story, we would organize an intervention. We would be super, super concerned, and for the good reasons, I think. So love is, yes, a matter of the individual, but it's also a cultural matter. So that was kind of a liberating experience for me, and I was like, okay, I'm a media and cultural scholar, at least on paper, so I'm gonna study love. I'm gonna make love the subject of my research. And I suppose that was also a way in which I could keep on exploring love without necessarily, hook up with idiots. And also, incidentally, I found love with this guy here, so it made sense to explore it intellectually. I was in a good position. I still am in a very good position to do that. Right. Okay, so I conducted an ethnographic studies in Italy and the UK involving mostly millennials and Gen Z of different sexual orientation, although my focus has been, I suppose, on heterosexual cultures from a feminist viewpoint, because I really believe in situated knowledge. And I realized things are changing. I found that the idea that I developed about love was kind of outdated. I realized that there is a paradigmatic shift that, for the sake of boldness, I would call a second sexual revolution. A second sexual revolution that leads to what I call a post-romantic ethos. What is a post-romantic ethos? A post-romantic ethos is a disposition, is a structure of feeling that emerges out of the delusion of and the delusion and the moral critique with a culture of sex and love that has revealed its ideological stance. People are fed up with casual sex because it's painful, because the morning after you still wait for that call and that call does not arrive, but you cannot suffer for it because it's not in fashion anymore. I'm fed up too. I started thinking, okay, of when I was younger. I know, unbelievable, I was younger than now. And it started making a lot of sense. So I started the research studying dating apps. It was my entry point. And at the beginning, I expected people to tell me all sorts of spicy, erotic tales. And to my initial puzzlement, they didn't at all. They were like, yes, I have the dating app so that I can avoid hanging out with people. I can avoid going to dates because I can still negotiate with my desire on the app, even without meeting anybody. And if you think about the business model of an app, the business model of a dating app needs people to be on the app. As soon as you find someone, you are no more on the app. So what seemed at the beginning paradoxical, actually, it's quite obvious in the end. So I collected a lot of these what Anna Serezin calls heteropessimism, a sense of skepticism and even embarrassment in regard of the heterosexual politics of relationship, because they are doomed by the abhorrent morality of capitalism and patriarchy. So the post-romantic ethos somehow rejects this, this significance, reject this kind of romance, rejects romance as such, and the main codes of romance on an ethical basis. It indicates the attempt to codify a new morale, a new ethics for love. So it stems from this moral critique. if the sexual revolution of the 70s and 80s saw sex and love as a mode of the transgression, as a way to disrupt, as a way to break rules, the post-romantic revolution seeks to re-regulate. Now, as we all know, there's no such a thing as absolute freedom. We cannot aspire to absolute disalienation. So what is the hidden, the underpinning utopia of post-romantic love? And this is my provocation, because I don't have time to support it. Well, I think the utopia of post-romantic love is love that does not hurt. It's love that is healthy. It's love that is efficient. It's love without the risk of the trauma. So we are very, very far away from Roland Barthes' love. You know, Roland Barthes' Fragments of a Lover's Discourse, it's all about suffering. There is the elogio of the tears. There is agony. There is the catastrophe. When he talks about suicide, Roland Barthes says, well, suicide is a very ordinary thought for the lover. Well, we are very far from that. We want love and sex that does not disrupt the balance of the self. What are we trying to avoid? I think we're also trying to avoid the trauma, the catastrophe, the signifier of the catastrophe. We are trying to avoid the catastrophe of the end. So in this sense, I think it resonates with an historical moment, with our pre-apocalyptic historical moment. We know all the reasons why life is unsustainable and the end is near, and at the same time, by declaring our knowledge, by declaring our awareness of the shortcomings of how we live, of the moral shit on how we live, we at the same time avoid to face the truth. Thanks. Okay. I'm back to share. So I should change maybe a bit. Okay, now I'm back to share. Congratulations, Carolina, that was amazing. Yeah, Iris, what do you want to tell us? You've talked already this morning, but we want to hear more, you know?
This was great to listen to your interventions, guys. I think it's very nice that I feel that there is a lot of shared ground, and it's not, the kind of intellectual space I'm trying to kind of like occupy with my work often brings me in places where the shared ground is not very easy to find. But I think, I was very pleased to hear your approaches to these issues around pleasure and love that are important in my work. And maybe what I'll try to do now is, I guess, just give you some immediate thoughts on what you just said.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, Alberto, I'll start with you. I think what you do is, the project, the endeavor of bringing more attention to the politics, the positive politics of pleasure is hugely important. I applaud that, and I share the intention and the significance of the endeavor. I think not only is this important because I think we desperately need it amongst the progressive left. Like there's all this doom thinking that it's just failing to inspire, that is my issue with a lot of traditional left critics of capitalism, that they tend to occupy that space of critiquing from afar or from the top down, and this is an approach that I think is very problematic. But I think one point I would like to make, and maybe explore together how relevant it is that for now, for the time being, in my view, the most successful political space within which the politics of pleasure is deployed and is energizing in very effective ways is the radical right wing, and interesting strands within the right wing, the conspiratorial right wing. I mean, I'm fascinated by movements like QAnon and their links to American populism, you know, the events of the Capitol Hill and the kind of, but also like the interesting, you know, I'm interested in German politics at the moment. I'm looking at how these weird alliances of movements like New Age and kind of new spirituality movements find interesting meeting points with kind of quite like unsavory, nationalistic and misogynistic and sexist movements, and all of the above at the same time. You see it in things like crypto bro culture and, you know, this kind of financial speculative imaginaries that I was describing earlier today. So there are these, I guess part of my critique of those political spaces is that in order to understand them, we need to, it's insufficient to just say that there have been, these movements represent something about a return, a yearning for returning to a past, to a fabled past, like the narrative of nationalism, right? Retrieving past greatness or retrieving the sense of identity that has been injured, let's say, you know, male identity that has been injured. I think there is a projection into the future which takes place with this collective myth-making that they do. And that collective myth-making is joyful. I mean, very derived joy. If you look at the Capitol Hill crowds that stormed in, they weren't just breaking things up. They were also chanting, they were happy, they were smiling, they were overjoyed, you know, with what was going on. I mean, of course, there's all sorts of literature on like riots and the elements of joy that you get from participating in a crowd and so on. But I think nonetheless these are elements that are creative and constructive, and they are mobilized within the right, I think, more effectively at the moment than on the left. So yeah, that's just a point for you, Alberto, and I'm interested in how you see that side of the spectrum and what they do there. And so on the point of love, and I mean, I'm fascinated by your work, and I'm very interested in work that engages empirically with things like desire and love, and I sort of, so I have a chapter in the book about which I spoke earlier this morning. I have a chapter about dating apps and speculative intimacies. And I engage there the work of AoIRFlash and Beck and Giddens, and I'm quite critical of them. So for you, my question would be, I want to understand a little bit better how you position your notion of, I guess, this kind of, your critique of this second, what would you call it, the post-romantic self, let's say, right? And maybe I'll just try very briefly to tell you what my beef is with AoIRFlash and Giddens and Beck. And, huh?
I want to know.
Yes, I'll just say this and then I'll just invite your thoughts on it. So, my sort of dissatisfaction with the AoIRFlash thesis, which as I understand it is that, you know, and following Beck and Giddens, you know, we live in this uncertain society where neoliberal capitalism finds the subject kind of, yes, disoriented, and so we become romantic entrepreneurs, and so choice is the vehicle, and, you know, we fetishize choice, and it gives us the illusion of control, right? But love hurts, and so the choice is the veneer of keeping hurting away, and so dating apps, all these people hate dating apps. They say, you know, AoIRFlash says dating apps are the instruments of neoliberal capitalism through which the romantic self, you know, is sustained, and I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, but what I'm trying to do, as you would have guessed from my this morning's talk, is see the progressive and radical possibilities of platforms like dating apps. And my assumption is that, again, there is a subject that is more, these dating apps, yes, they very often, let's say, I mean, they put people in a position of, they're reductive, right? They take away the complexity and the hurt and all this, the Barthian kind of notion of love. But people do connect through them and not through matching. So my argument in speculative communities is that the speculative romantic subject is aware of the impossibility of the dream of the beautiful ideal partner. Like my understanding of those apps, and I've studied them a lot ethnographically as well, is that, but I'm half joking, ethnographic as in I use them a lot, that's what I mean, is that the contemporary post-neoliberal subject isn't using those apps with, like, the illusion has been pierced, like the finding the real one, finding the one is not really what drives people. I don't think casual hookup is also what drives. Well, yeah, I think I agree with your point there. It's a tired pattern. People don't find satisfaction in it anymore. But there is an element of social connection. So, during the COVID period, people were using like Tinder, like, how Facebook used to be used, just to chat, sit in the houses and chat. So what I'm interested in is how this speculative intimacy, what I call that, what is the politics of it? So how do people coalesce around the use of apps, say, for example, in queer communities, and there are interesting studies that look at how dating apps for gay men or for gay women or for queer people are offer important space for kind of for collective politics that is counter heteronormative and patriarchal and so on to emerge and to give space to it and so long intervention, but my point is if we just stay with the Giddens and Illouz narrative, I think, as I understand, at least the Giddens position, is we ought to be moving towards a kind of cosmopolitan risk embracing that makes something better out of choice. And I think that in practice, people are rejecting that. They're not where they're veering towards. I don't think that choice is what drives people, the illusion of choice anymore. So if it's not choice, then what is it? I think there is something community-oriented, but I'm interested in how that, if at all, features in your work, which was his real work with speaking to people. So yes, maybe I'll stop here. But these were, fascinating interventions, and thank you for them.
Thank you very much. That was a really good and challenging response, which is rare. So thank you. What do we do? Do you want to respond and I respond and we open the floor, or should we open the floor and then we do kind of a response?
In the meantime, or we can continue later. But yes, I think, my opinion, opening the floor is...
Yeah, let's open the floor then, because otherwise, the risk is that we talk only us. Yeah. So we have Michael, Leopoldina, you. The first hand that I saw was Michael. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Come si chiama? Yeah, yeah. Trigger, suscitate, generate. Yeah. Thank you very much. We have time for one last question. Oh well, we have a lot. So if you are quick, because I know Cecilia for sure, and then I know there is Alessandro there. Maybe if you are real quick, we can do it because as a chair, I care a lot about your aperitivo, and I know there is another panel. So bear with me.
A pleasurable activity.
Yeah, quick and cruel, Cecilia.
Convenient consumption. I'm about to quote him in the reply, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Ale. No. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so here we had very interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, quick replies. Your questions are much more articulate and complex than the replies we can give in the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Seconds.
No, vabbè, we still have 10, 15 minutes, I think. Yeah, exactly. So do you want to start, Albe? And yeah.
Yes. So if you remember Monty Python summarizing Proust competition in under 15 seconds, I will try to do that. So thank you very much, both for the encouragement and the criticism. I really, really appreciate that. And it's a moment in which I really need it. So I will say a couple of things responding to the points you've made. First of all, it's about, for me, talking about, I think it also speaks to Leopoldina, about activism. I mean, my point, I didn't speak about my research, but the 3 points, the 3 main pillars of research that I've done, one is about art and activists, and I've seen a lot of pleasure and a politics of care very much influenced by third-generation feminist thought in Milan, right? And it was so important in weaving communities and in driving values beyond efficiency and competition. And I was very much inspired by what was possible. And I dig a lot in terms of history and how this thing, which has happened in 2012, was so much different from the cultures of the social squatting, i centri sociali in Italy in the 80s and the 90s, spaces for social healing after the fracture of the 1977. So I've seen these artists dissolving their artistic practice in social processes that were utopias. And the title of my book is Autonomous Art Institutions. So the idea that our imagination was to create an autonomous institution rather than fighting on the uneven field against capital institutions or political institutions were unable to do that. So I think there was a lot of exercise of embodied power, taking the streets, taking the squares, and organizing with an artistic vision such a powerful. There was a lot of prefiguration in that, and there was an explicit artistic sensitivity in making that happen. The aesthesis in terms of perceiving together, I think it was central to that political project. And then we have also the thing about if I'm critically performative choosing to talk about pleasure, and if I'm really describing another social reality. Yes, I can take it, and for me, it's about a matter of sociological gaze. I cannot really dive into assigning ontological differences to what I'm seeing if it's like substantially different from what was happening before, because an historian would say it happened before. So it's nothing inherently new. What I'm calling for is a different in-gaze, and that's the thing. And I will quote an emergent writer, Dostoevsky, and he says, shower him, in Notes from the Underground, he says this, shower him with all earthly blessings, plunge him so deep into happiness that nothing is visible but the bubbles rising to the surfaces of his happiness. Give him such economic prosperity that he will have nothing left to do but sleep, eat gingerbread, and worry about the continuance of world history. So I think we are in a weird moment like this again, where we can worry about the continuance of world history because we are pretty much well off. And I think about the imagination of different parts of the world, I can see some differences. I can imagine some differences. And then about playfulness. Yes, I agree completely. And about Byung-Chul Han, I'm talking also about the two strands of my research. One is about crypto, and there is the toxic masculinity embedded in crypto, for sure. But also see Korean investors who have seen their degrees and their jobs, who have failed them to reach a sustainable life. So I see them investing in crypto and Bitcoin, paying 20% premium on that because they're trying to solve existential and inequality issues. I see them as a pursuit of happiness and joy, like taking down GameStop, like taking down the hedge funds and the hedge funds. So it solves anxiety. It tries to solve anxiety from the other one, from the one on, and it creates new source of anxiety. And as I was saying, digital crack cocaine is a metaphor for TikTok. And then I will quote on Byung-Chul Han, and there is Carlos Colari that is writing about post-society, even beyond post-capital, but post-society, and he says, even Byung-Chul Han seems to be close to Alessandro Baricco de Game, another writer, an Italian writer, and they said the human being of the future is no longer interested in things. He's not a worker, the homo faber, but a player, the homo ludens, all these gamblers, the play, the gambling aspect of it. And then, what is pleasure? What is the difference between pleasure and distraction or playfulness? Yeah, that is very difficult for me to articulate this answer. What is pleasure, really? Well, I guess it's like I'm lingering towards, and then the third part of my research could probably help. I think about co-working spaces. People trying to escape the boundaries of corporate world and being in a beautiful aesthetic place like this one, like many places in Bali, and we have palms and we have fruits and we can Instagram about it and we can talk healthy food. That kind of thing, I think, is a part of pleasure that I'm talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So should we go in the same round we present, so I take some of the questions? Okay. So, well, I studied dating apps for quite a while, and I published a few things on them, and also I'm supervising a PhD student, Carmen, who's not here now, but she's looking at how dating apps can be spaces for the development of intimacy. So I do not think that dating apps are all about alienation. This is not what I'm saying. They can be used in many different ways. And also, of course, they can be used in different ways by different people in different contexts. So this is also part of the reply to Alessandro. It is difficult for me to say it in a sentence, but dating apps, why dating apps work? Well, for all sorts of reasons. The main thing that I'm saying is that they are technologies in a Foucauldian sense that allow people, the subject, to negotiate with their fantasies and with their desire, even not only or necessarily, but also and even without the embodied encounter. So one could argue in this respect, they are nothing necessarily new in that one could fantasize with, the Brad Pitt poster or Regine Beautiful, the cinema, novels, they have had that function, they still have it. But arguably, apps, because they're apps, they are much more, you have a different relationship, right? They're much more responsive and interactive. There is a sense in which the app seduces you. The app vibrates, it makes your phone vibrating. And even without meeting anybody, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. There are a lot of people that get married that have a so-called Tinder baby, so I'm not denying that. But I'm saying, our neighbors, yeah, for instance, Chiara and Adi, they say hello, they're happy. And maybe they wouldn't have met otherwise, because they come from very different kind of social and cultural backgrounds. So I'm not denying this. But what I'm saying is that even without going somewhere and meeting another human being and see whether they want to kiss you or not, you can still negotiate with your desire, test your desirability, and access the imaginary and the discourse about love. You can be on a dating apps, then you can gossip or talk with your friends, say, hey, will you write me? What do you think about her or him or them? Even if you don't meet them. And matches, they can lead to a date, they can lead to a wedding, but, and now that's the whole, the last campaign from Tinder, it's all about people getting married with kids, so, no, I mean, very kind of, if you like, normative, no? So dating apps themselves, they're trying to say, oh, we are not just for sex, we are for real, we are the real deal. But even without meeting someone, a match is a sign in itself. It's a sign of desirability. It opens up the imaginary of a future horizon of possibilities. And this is used by different people in different ways, in different contexts. But I do think that there is like a dominant narrative, a mainstream narrative. I'm a scholar of pop culture, mainstream culture. And that doesn't mean that everybody do as the mainstream cultural codes would prescribe, but it does mean that people need to negotiate with that codes. And maybe in some cases this means rejecting them. And here I come to the post-romantic, and the post-romantic, and I didn't have time to elaborate on that, but what I mean by that is it's something that in fact is a response could be read as a response to Illutz and Giddens and Beck, etc., to that kind of pessimism in a way. So what I'm saying is that the post-romantic emerged out of a critique that Illutz and Beck and Giddens and others, they have kind of theorized, they have captured the malaise of Bauman, the malaise of which have been captured. But it is also, and more interestingly, so this is the part that I'm interested in at the moment, it's a process of creation of new codes, of a new policy of the relationship between the sexes. And I don't think that I have time to offer examples, but I think it has to do with creating a new ethics. Maybe the easiest example I can make, although I don't have time to articulate, is the Me Too. Me Too and consent is a dispositive for a different negotiation of the relationship between sexes. And if you have read the last book of Sally Rooney, Beautiful World, Where Are You, Mondo Bello Dove Sei, the sexual, the erotic scenes, they emerge out of this dialogue. What do you want? Can you suck my cock? Yes. Are you okay if I tell you to give me a head? Or you want me to use another language? Can I touch you here? Do you like if I ask you to fuck? And this is a new language, these are new codes. And dating apps, to avoid this trauma, and the way Sally Rooney captures it is in this way that does not sacrifice eros. It's the utopia in a way, and people freaked out. Like everyone is in love with the characters of Sally Rooney books. Not maybe not you, but but there are many examples, and to say that this ambivalence. So on the one hand, this ethical foundation. On the other hand, obviously, there is the question of can we avoid suffering and trauma altogether, and what is foreclosed? So to give another example, is apparently it's quite popular to send a questionnaire to someone before you meet them in real life. So generally about 20 questions just to understand who are them, just to avoid wasting time, just to make sure you're not meeting with a negationist, a fascist, a misogynist. And on the one hand, we understand this can be understood, this will of mitigating the risk, but also on the other hand, the underpinning kind of assumption is that yes, we can anticipate, yes, we can prevent. It's the sort of preventive ethos. And yeah, so before putting the body there, I think the body is super interesting and super crucial. I think I partially replied with the example of Sally Rooney and how this sex can happen respecting the body. But obviously dating apps, as I said, they offer also a space to access this without the body. Thank you. Aris, couple of minutes, whatever.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to be brief. I mean, this is really getting apocalyptic now. Planes, rain, bells, church bells, it's, yeah. So I'll just make 2 quick points. Just first to say, I actually don't think, I would argue that we're not doing performative sociology to Michael's point. Like I think, you know, it's to me, it's actually quite simple. I mean, when I look at the QAnon Trump crowd at Capitol Hill, I'm not saying, oh, they're happy because they're dancing. I'm saying there is a whole process of building community that has gone through methods. So what is believing in a conspiracy? It is playing a game. There's this gamification culture that people buy into, and it makes them, you know, it is pleasurable, but it leads to really problematic actions. There is this collective inquiry of finding the truth and, you know, playing, okay, is it, you know, the pedophiles in the basement? Is it, you know, the UFOs? These things have an element of coalescing collectives around a game, and it's not about whether I call it a game or not as a sociologist. I think I'm just calling attention to something that is very real and is being often neglected for the sake of, you know, just a derogatory sociology that just dismisses those subjects as just, you know, irrational crowds. And so, yeah, I don't think there's anything performative about that. And then I just want to make a final point that this is a concept and a word that was mentioned a few times, distraction, as in being distracted, and using this doom scroll, you know, we doom scroll, we go back home, you know, in Sweden, not just in Sweden, everywhere, right? And we just doom scroll to sleep, ourselves to sleep. And my point here is, what are we being distracted from when we do this, right? Because, sorry? Life? Yeah, I disagree. I disagree. So I disagree. I don't think we should stop doom scrolling. I think, you know, I'm gonna just bear with me. I'm just gonna throw this provocation out there. Sorry, is this doing a bit of a return? I do really want to ask the question: what is the claim about? Just bear with me for 1 minute. In the act of scrolling, we are immersed in a present. It is, what does this immersion contain? Like, what is it that we as subjects are doing with swiping on Tinder and scrolling on Instagram? Like, are we becoming lopsided and individualized and just lost in the present? Or are we immersing in a present that is just different to, it has different, a different quality to it? I mean, immersion in the present can be an element of like revolutionary radical action. I know this is a difficult, you know, I'm drawing this a little bit, I'm stretching this a little bit, but I don't buy the argument that if only we stopped scrolling, we shut down our social media, we went to the farm, I mean, someone else made that point today, and then this is where real bodies meet and real radical action happens. Yes, bodies are important in creating collective action, but there is something that happens in the act of the scrolling that we need to understand better. We cannot dismiss as mere distraction from this idealized collective action, right? And so I think the success of technologies like Tinder and dating apps, as well as the other ones like, you know, Instagram, astrology apps, the point I was trying to make earlier is that they don't give us any solutions. We don't go to them because we expect anything from them in the shape of an answer, a certainty, a partner, a truth. They're just doing something brilliant, which is they mirror, someone used that word, they mirror our conditions of volatility and uncertainty. And so in doing so, they're very cozy. They create a cozy space. When we scroll, we don't get any meaningful sense you know, that answers to our needs, but we do feel comfortable because, you know, these are uncertain spaces. So I think that there is we need to stay with that moment. We need to stay with that moment and not reject it entirely. Yeah, maybe I should leave it here. I mean,
Okay. I'm sorry, but I promise the next
You can cut me off,
panelists that they will have space too, because otherwise it becomes a sort of Darwinian thing that who's first talks more, and so we can keep on talking, keep on scrolling. See you soon.
Shall I? Yeah, and then they speak, and then we'll see what happens. Sì, direi di sì. It's actually, can you hear me well? Yeah? I think that after a pleasurable panel, I'm going to introduce myself in a moment, but I think that after a pleasurable panel, going back to talk about work, the only way we can do it is that for having you locked into the room, like we are doing, because of the rain, right? So I was under the impression there were 4 of us. I'm not sure if Stephen would like to join us on stage. It's okay, of course. You've been here before, so they know you. Well, thank you for sticking around. I'm very happy to introduce you to this panel and to be part of the speculating at the end of times. I'm also tired. Summer School and AoIRFlash Point Symposium. My name is Alessandro Gandini. I work at the University of Milan, and this panel is also co-sponsored by the Craftwork project, of which I'm a principal investigator, which is an ERC-funded research on the new artisanal economy and the new forms of work within that. I'm gonna basically do a brief introduction and ask the question that the panel is about. So what is the future of work, to my esteemed colleagues on my left. Straight on the order of our table, I have Alessandro Delfanti from the University of Toronto, who is sitting beside me, and then Anne-Marie Jeannet, she's from the University of Milan as well, a colleague of mine, and another ERC grantee for a project called DESPO, the Industrialization and Society and the Political Consequences, and Stephen Shapiro from the University of Warwick, which you all know about from this morning already, so there is no need of further introduction, I think. So, as a brief point to make, I think, of course, the future of work is a relevant question when it comes to speculation and speculating, and it is a question that we have kept asking in society for a long time now. But the last 10 years have been particularly significant in that a number of different utopias have come back to talk about work again, thinking in random ways about the end of work, first of all. Up to things like accelerationism and the push that artificial intelligence is giving us to the practices and the cultures of work, up to more outlandish things like fully automated luxury communism, which may be something to which to aspire to, at least for some in the room, but still has quite significant challenges into the practical implementation within the broader, especially I think I'm referring here to the broader post-work agenda, up to and no less the post-pandemic environment, where things like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, and different kinds of phenomena point actually to a significant change in the ways in which we conceive about work as a sort of key component in the way we build our societies. And especially these point to the idea of meaningfulness of work. I think the element that brings these together are essentially 2. On the one hand, we have started to question again, what does it mean to work and why are we actually doing it? Which may be a nice question also for us here, being locked in a room outside the storm. And more broadly, in the context, what does it mean to work in the context of a society where the sort of industrial model of work based on start and employment and the permanent contract is slowly but significantly fading away in exchange for things that may have different terms, like industrious modernity or the post-employment society. So, and again, last but not least, artificial intelligence, I mentioned this before, calls about robots taking our jobs are now daily on any kind of publication. We've seen them a lot. I'm sure most of you have bumped into an article like that in the last 6 months. But this is not new. There is a sort of historiography of this taking place since the 1920s. So why is this time different, and why is this time something we should actually worry about when the previous iterations of this same argumentation have been empirically taking us into new jobs that have been created and others that have been cancelled, but in a sort of osmotic balance. So, given this context and this framework and your own individual research interests, what is the future of work, my esteemed colleagues? Shall we go in this order, if anyone agrees with the sort of starting from Alessandro on my left and then ending with you, Stephen? Like the previous panel, I guess, very brief interventions, if you can, so we can allow a discussion for all of us to participate in. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Alessandro. And I was going to talk about this like theorization about property and the future of technology used in the realm of work. So talk about patents and like sort of theorize the way in which they can allow us to see something or read something into the future. But then after the last panel, I was like, maybe I should do something more fun. It's very late. So I'm going to talk about Pinocchio. Okay? So last summer, Pinocchio. So this is about the past of non-work. Sorry, it's not about the future of work. So last summer, I read the original tale. I reread the original tale. And I came up with the idea that I wrote sort of a crit-lit essay about Pinocchio and the refusal of work. I sort of came up with the idea that maybe we can read something about the future of the refusal of work into the original Pinocchio tale. He refuses to work. He's sold his ABC book for cash to spend at the circus. He's ready to face any consequences to avoid the burden of modern life. He's ready to kill, literally. His friend Lampwick is turned into a donkey and dies of overwork. So the truth is that the original tale, I think, can be read as sort of a radical anti-work story if we push the boundaries a little bit and maybe teach us something about the politics of the refusal of work and the great resignation today. So not the first association that comes to mind, because like more contemporary adaptations of Collodi's tale have watered down the rebellious nature of the marionette. So especially the Disney movie, which is basically about the happy-go-lucky kid wants to become a boy, blah blah blah, which is actually in the book too, but not the only possible reading. So I think Pinocchio's the original tale is also about the difficulty to adapt to the new reality of a rapidly changing late 19th century Italian economy, a time where major political and economic changes were taking place and reshaping both education and work. So people were supposed to join this new economy, this nascent capitalist economy, the workshop being the symbolic sort of place where this economy was developing. And as a marionette, as you can imagine, Pinocchio was supposed to join this new economy. I mean, he's an automaton, he's an object to be directed by others. Problem is, Pinocchio's got no strings, Pinocchio's got free will, school and work are not high on his agenda, so he simply says, no, I'm not going to be controlled, I'm not going to abide, I'm not going to work, I'm not going to go to school. So not a chance. Until the very end of the tale, Pinocchio refuses to go to school or to get a job. Again, even in the face of the massive calamities he encounters along the way. His mentors try very hard to convince him, of course, to behave, especially the talking cricket was the main moral voice. So why don't you at last learn a trade so that you can earn a honest living, he asks Pinocchio. The puppet immediately loses patience, and he says, of all trades in the world, there is only one that really suits me, that of eating, drinking, sleeping, playing, and wandering around from morning till night. Yeah. As the cricket insists, Pinocchio immediately kills him with a hammer, something that Disney didn't replicate in its cartoon. So The same could be said about more contemporary adaptations of the novel. Like, I don't know if you've seen Guillermo del Toro's last year, just six months ago, the new animation movie by Guillermo del Toro, where, again, Pinocchio seems to be eager to work. He says, "Oh, I love work." When Geppetto asks him, we have to work, we have work to do. So there is something about like him actually wanting to work in Guillermo del Toro's adaptation, but Pinocchio quickly becomes disillusioned. He starts working for the circus, who turns him into a mouthpiece for fascism. There is wage theft even happening. At a certain point, he just quits the circus, missing home, being sort of penniless and overworked, and also disillusioned with fascism, but that's a different story, of course. So if this sounds familiar, I think it's because Pinocchio, if we read in the original tale, can say something about our contemporary time. So at a time when disillusionment with work is central to our culture and politics again. So we're still, again, facing crisis, economic and otherwise. Again, the meaning and value of work is put into question, and the Great Resignation, of course, has been discussed today a little bit. So people work more precariously, under the command of digital technologies that squeeze value from them, more dangerously, as made evident by the pandemic. Education in crisis too, student debt rampant, the value of a degree dropping by the day, and so on and so forth. So in this context too, the temptation to check out and try to imagine a different kind of life comes back. So the original tale was actually written, was published seriously between 1881 and 1883. So that was an interesting moment, a moment where the nascent Italian nation state was going through these massive changes. So most importantly, a new government, the so-called historical left, had come to power. So this coalition of liberals and reformists that would dominate Italian politics for a few decades. So the country at that point was enveloped in a massive economic downturn, so massive economic crisis. So the government pushes a program of social and economic reforms aimed at modernizing the still heavily agrarian country back in the day and stimulating industrial production. So again, the nascent capitalist economy based on the workshops in this new industrial sector. One of the main reforms was the Copino Law of 1877, which introduced 3 years of compulsory education for all children between age 6 and 9. So for the first time in Italian history, schools become mandatory. School becomes mandatory, sorry. So these reforms were driven by, sort of progressive ideals about access to education and blah, 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 but also very concrete response to the needs, the very material needs for the emerging industrial economy. Basically, the need for reliable labor. So mass education was needed to turn rural populations into a class of workers with basic literacy, able to read instructions, ready to show up on time, wear shoes, be well-fed, deal and follow the pace dictated by machinery and so on and so forth. And Gramsci wrote about this, like the agrarian industrial bloc that sort of drove these changes. So in that context, as you can imagine, Pinocchio's tale can also be read as a story of nationalist even, and economic necessity. He must learn a trade, he must get a job, he must do that for the new capitalist economy and for his country. So my point is this essay that I wrote is that his original refusal was also the reaction to anxiety about this phase of rapid industrialization, the fast cycles of work forced upon the rural population, the way in which individuals were made responsible for an economic crisis that they were not generated by forces they could not control. So similar, in a sense. Today we are told we need to invest in our education, put our skills to the service of big tech corporations, maybe our entire lives, work 2 jobs, get indebted, stop complaining. If there is a crisis, there is no alternative. So for a brief moment, Collodi's Pinocchio, the original Pinocchio, says no, and instead goes after immediate enjoyment. Sadly, it doesn't succeed, of course, and there is an obvious psychoanalytical angle here, which has indeed been explored by several critics of this tale. So clash between pleasure and repression, also between life and death, or even an epic tale of metamorphosis and rebirth. But certainly the pleasure vis-a-vis duty is something that we can recognize in my own reading, at least, of Pinocchio. So also surfacing in some accounts and more contemporary readings of the story is this interpretation that in order to find redemption and become a boy, Pinocchio is condemned to abandon his freedom and put his newly acquired human body to work, finally. So for him to be human is to work and work hard and make money and save money and so on and so forth. Like other individual rebels, and my favorite example is of course, Herman Melville's Bartleby, defeat is sort of baked into his refusal. So like Bartleby saying, I would prefer not to, and then the final effect of this is him starving to death, if you remember the Melville's novel. So Pinocchio is also clearly too young, too naive, and too isolated to imagine sort of a post-work society in which a free association of producers can replace the misery of work under capitalism. And after all, after almost 150 years, we're still struggling with this. So nothing new in a sense. And also, if we think that there is something that Pinocchio teaches us, one thing it does teach us is that something that the feminists wrote or talked about 100 years later. So the fact that someone's the male refusal of work means that someone else has to work on the behalf of the refuser. So for each Pinocchio, eating, drinking, sleeping, and wandering around from morning till night, at least one Geppetto and one fairy must work hard. So, of course, essential workers and women, like very predictably. So Collodi was not revolutionary, of course, and he would never have gone this far. So at the end of the story, Pinocchio is tamed, becomes a boy. He transforms through love for his father, but also by working and saving money and so on and so forth, if you remember the original story. So was this redemption or damnation? This is the question maybe we can ask again today. My favorite answer comes from a Napolitan songwriter, Eduardo Bennato, who in 1977, not a random year, wrote an entire concept album about Pinocchio. And there is one quote where he says that in the process of becoming a boy, Pinocchio has gained strings and forever lost his freedom. And I'm going to finish with a quote from the song. Now you don't take a step unless someone from above commands and pulls the strings for you. Thank you.
And on that note, Marie, over
Okay,
to you.
I have to follow that. All right, thank you. That was very interesting. I will now say some brief remarks that are perhaps less literary. But what I was thinking about when I prepared my remarks for today about the future of work was when we think about the future of work and things that have come up also listening to some of the presentations today, we think about disruption, about change, about transformation, about revolution, right? And what I'd like to emphasize today is for us to think, when we think about what the future society is, to pause and wonder and contemplate the fact that future society may look a lot more like today than we expect it to. Now, I'll try to explain why this is. And so we should keep in mind that continuity is a very strong force as much as disruption and change. And the link between today and the future is a lot stronger than we might imagine, okay? Because even if the changes of a technological nature are very rapid, I don't dispute that, and the changes in the economy can be very swift, occupations change, industries change, that's not to be denied. But the social change that follows those changes is very sticky, okay? It doesn't happen in a uniform way. It often lags behind those rapid changes. And it lags behind it in a discontinuous way, and this is what I study. It lags behind it in fits and starts. Certain people change in groups in society and others do not. And that means that the revolution that can occur from any of these changes is incomplete. And what happens is a lot more like a fossil, right? So we can think of sediments which layer on top of other sediments, but that are never replaced. And so what my work, for example, does is to look at how the sediments fit together in our current present, right? And I think it's important if we think even from today we've talked a lot about post things, post-industrialism, post-Fordism, post-work, post-romanticism, right? So a lot of posts going on. So if we think even about a very simple transition, which is the transition from Fordism to post-Fordism, okay? We can all agree that there's been a more mainstream push towards post-Fordism. But what we can think about is that some occupations and some social classes in those occupations have not had that luxury, and in some way some of the principles that we espouse in post-Fordism are a privilege, which is not necessarily privilege, or it depends how you want to look at it, right? So we can think of within its own organization, you can have assembly workers, which are highly controlled and are operating around the old paradigm of Fordism, while skilled technicians, engineers, and marketing professionals operate with a post-Fordist logic, and those belong to the more middle and upper middle classes. And those emphasize the classic things of post-Fordism, like autonomy and innovation, customization, and personal experience. And we can talk about a company, but most of us probably work in universities, and it's not, we can all think about, at least at my Italian university, we have a situation where the academics come in and out of the office as they wish, while the administrative staff are highly controlled and have to badge in and out of the office as if they are somehow in a Fordist logic, while we are in a post-Fordist logic, and this is supposed to be a natural hierarchy of things. They were also highly controlled during the pandemic. They had to be constantly in front of their computer screen, et cetera, and all of the adaptations that we had. And this is all within the same department of a university, right? So it's not that some people in left-behind places haven't adapted to globalization, et cetera, and people in cities have adapted. It's people living in the same places and working in the same places, which are operating at two side-by-side separate logics. And so we can think about why does this happen. So there are a few reasons that I'll just raise, and then I'll let the other speakers make their remarks. But one of the reasons that this happens is because of a process that we know, socialization. We're not necessarily socialized into working in the new reality with the new technology. So we're socialized into working at a younger age, maybe in our 20s. We're also socialized for various other, what does work mean? We're socialized within the family, first of all, and then we're socialized in our early employment experiences. And so if you have people that are socialized into those employment experiences in earlier paradigms, even if the paradigm shifts, people don't just wake up one day and leave behind the values and the behaviors and the habits that were of a previous logic. They carry them with them, and new generations are then socialized, of course. Like any kind of social change, this is important. And that's the same thing with work behaviors and the role of work. So things might become economically and technologically obsolete, but they don't become socially obsolete. They continue to persist. The second thing, of course, is cultural reproduction. We can think about this as traditionally one would inside the family, right? So the role of work and the values attached to work are transmitted from parent to child. We can also think about cultural reproduction in the workplace. New technologies like ChatGPT might emerge, but if cultural change doesn't occur within an organization, those kinds of changes may not permeate all types of occupations, especially ones with a lot of occupational closure and tight control over entry and a lot of ethics that dominate certain occupations. So because then cultural reproduction happens within organizations and within professions, those changes don't necessarily take hold as fast as we expect them to. So what I would like to say as a story when I speculate about the future is a story much more about persistence. And because we know that people's values and norms and behaviors persist greatly despite the changes of technology. I hope in some way some of the fears and concerns that were raised here can be assuaged by that fact, right? That all of these changes to society that are happening and all of the fears that we have about the changing society, if we know just how sticky society is and just how difficult it is to change those norms and values which underlie the behaviors, we can also have maybe more confidence that things are not necessarily radically changing tomorrow because of the technological changes, right? And that's because there's this strong foundation of social interactions and the social fabric which maintains a strong sense of stability and continuity in society. And these are very much continuing to guide people's both their actions as well as their expectations for what they want in their life. And so there, I'll just close. Thank you.
So I'm the only thing holding you back from a drink. So I'll just say some things off the cuff and be a little bit more speculative. So the subtitle of Marx's Capital could have been Kadin, because really what capital does is takes one commodity chain and tracks it through the global system from the slave plantations in America through the tailoring, through the Manchester factories, through the tailoring, and so on. And, you know, Marx chose Kadin because, of course, Engels, he could always call up Engels and ask for data about it. It was but Marx had a four-sectoral notion of the capitalist totality at his time, which was agriculture, manufacturing, extraction industries, and transportation. That was what Marx saw as the world. Nowadays, we don't live in that world. Agriculture doesn't occupy the role that it did in the 19th century. Marx understood a service class, which he called unproductive, but he had no notion of a service economy, right? That's very different. Marx didn't live in a world where working class people routinely went out to restaurants to eat. The notion that that would be the commonplace rather than food preparation at home was something entirely unknown to him. So this is what I think the future of labor is going to be, particularly in the West. It will be on four main industries, I think. Algorithmic work, and by that I mean primarily tagging. The problem is that data is becoming more and more expensive, not cheaper, which is one reason why we have ChatGPT, is because they have to go back and try and find cheap data. But the reality is most of the internet requires a huge amount of brute labor to do tagging. We do it when we do CAPTCHA, right? Basically, we're working for Elon Musk, because if you notice, most of the ChatGPT are about autonomous driving. We're asked to recognize things cars do, not like, is this a banana versus a chimpanzee? It's like traffic cones. And so we're all servants of Elon in a certain way every time we try to read an academic article. This has implications for other kinds of liberation struggles. A lot of the tagging is exported to places like Africa, where there are very strict anti-LGBT rules, and so there's a way in which queerness becomes invisible in the new tagging world. But there's no such thing as artificial intelligence. That's just a marketing ploy. What we get is a lot of tagging. The second will be robotics, mainly maintenance of robotics. The third will be drones, which are going to completely change building. The Fordist rectilinear cranes, sorry, it's been a long day, are going to be a thing of the past. Building is going to be done on drones, and that means old cities like Naples can be transformed very easily. The Spanish Quarter, for instance, is that... Places like that. Okay, bad example on my part, but very tightly, places that you couldn't get a crane in, you'll now be able to radically transform. You'll be able to do micro building. And the last is 3D printing. 3D printing, does anyone know what the four growth fields for 3D printing will be? Some you can probably guess why that's going to be a major industry. No, I can just say it. This is the student thing. Okay, architecture, obviously, for housing. Tooling. The third has to do with, does anyone know what the riskiest thing an American, in particular, or a Westerner can do? Walking up or down the stairs. Or downstairs. Stairway activity, using a stairs is the riskiest thing a person can do due to falls. Particularly with osteoporosis and aging. Hip fractures are one of the best ways to end a life in the quartile. So the third growth field for 3D printing will be human body parts. Not simply the more glamorous things like hearts or lungs, but it's going to be bone scaffolding for an aging population, and this is going to be a major, major growth field. So if you want to keep your grandparents alive, the best thing you can do is put rails everywhere. If you can prevent them from falling, you're going to add more lives, more years to their life than medical treatments. And the last is food preparation, right? Believe it or not, 3D printing of food is going to be one of the big growth fields. So in other words, a place like McDonald's will be able to get away with a lot of the onerous activity, and it will just be done 3D printing. And that means a lot of this kind of work can be done telematically, right? It's not going to be site-specific anymore. You can do it. And so Marx had a name for that kind of work. He called it housework. Not housework in the sense of social reproduction, but piecework, where workers, largely feminized workers, or children didn't go to a factory where they were surveyed 9 to 5, they clocked in and out, but took bits and came back and did it at home. It was the most exploitative, most profitable form of activity. And housework is going to be the future of work. We saw this during COVID, when essentially we were doing housework and all this other kind of activity. This is what we really have to go, is we have to sort of build up those parts of capital which weren't about the factory, but about this kind of gig work, precarious work. That's going to be the future of it. The positive side of this is an extremely revolutionary situation. Marx and Engels thought the revolution was going to take place in the most highly industrialized sections of the West. The second volume, the second German editions, the last paragraph of Capital, Marx says the revolution is going to happen in England soon. They took that out, actually. We don't read that last paragraph because the certainty. Instead, the revolution takes place in Russia. Why? Russia didn't have an industrialized urban population and had a combined uneven population where people worked in the factories during the winter months and then went back and worked in the fields during the summer months. And so that's the union of the hammer and the sickle, not workers in the south, industrialized workers in the north, but Russia meant that people were constantly doing both at the same time. And that meant that revolutionary activity was able to be seated in places and to be carried from one region to the other region, so that actually Russia was able to be revolutionized much more quickly than England, where, as I said earlier today, workers went to the cities but then didn't go back. And so now we're getting these new formations of what's called the union drip, where unionization is being led by people who are like university workers who are now leading unionization activities in places like Starbucks. The side hustle, which I think almost every postgraduate student has today. In other words, they've got their academic work, and then they've got some other side hustle. And that means the future of insurgency, I think, is looking really great. And again, as Marx predicted, it's an insurgency that capitalism has seeded by the transformation of labor relations to these new telematic forms of informatic machinification.
I'm gonna abuse of my privilege as a chair to address 2 points that I think emerge as a sort of red line across these different contributions. And if I may, to Carolina and Alberto's talk before, I think one key aspect that kind of binds these together is the idea of time, and Aris as well. We are not coming to terms that, possibly in a relatively meaningful way, with the question of how time fits into all these conversations and how important it is, our understanding, social understanding of time in, for instance, the politics of pleasure. I remember one of the exchanges you had before thinking about the politics of pleasure as politics of the present. And so Alberto's call to actively transform them into a politics of the future is quite a difficult task to imagine. And in the same way, I'm also thinking in particular about your contribution, Anne-Marie, the idea of continuity and change, because of course one might even argue that continuities and change should be located in the context of a specific time frame, because one might argue in a very speculative dimension that the whole of industrial society is just sort of brackets into an otherwise very chaotic world, which doesn't necessarily have to conform to that, despite we have accustomed to the idea that work is what industrial society made us think of. And ultimately, which is more personal, is the idea that even going back to Marx, the relevance, the sort of significant resurgence at different stages, it kind of pops up here and there all the time of craft, because craft comes with the burden of being good work, and even Marx did not dislike craft for all that matter. So these different elements, craft brings these different elements into the picture also as a politics of time, because in the moment that we are living, craft work is a sort of call to go back to something, but also looking ahead. So again, time plays a sort of tension here in relation to these different conversations. So with this in mind, I want to open up the floor for the final conversation before your spritz. So make it worthy. Leopoldina, please.
Thank you. I completely delighted, Alessandro, by your analysis.
Not to be taken too seriously.
No. Wait a minute. Pinocchio is part of the history of imagination about robotics, and it is very interesting to notice that the shift from Carpenter, Geppetto, to the field of technologies and robotics, big data, AI, I don't know, so these cluster of we should talk about cluster of technologies, not that will carry us also.
Thank you, Leopoldina. Other questions, please?
Yeah. To get back to the AoIRFlash time, are we really sure we have to look at the future? Or shall we maybe make a step back and look at what we already have? Like, for example, robotics, yes, but sometimes we have an artificial intelligence. I heard someone saying robotics, but some artificial intelligence, most of it is invisible. It's not something that is, but in our imaginary, if you ask people, they picture artificial intelligence like a physical robot. Right? But it's not, because it's already in our mobile phones. When you check the weather, about this rain, okay? Or you were booking your flights or your hotel to come here, is already there, and the word logic and politics are already there. So I was also intrigued by your 3D technology, which is true.
3D printing, yeah.
Yeah, 3D printing, and I'm biotechnological companies involved in the project, which is around that. And that definitely is one way of making an analogic version of what all this technology is about, right? This is definitely one of the applications will be more. So my reflection for you is about, are we sure that is something that is not already happening? But of course it is already happening, we know about this. The challenge would be more about, at this time I'm not so sure that things will change. First of all, as you said, not immediately, yes, but maybe already they are. But on the other hand, there is something good about it. Yes and no. Our reality is so dual, so there will be good things and bad things. But after all, do we need to change our paradigms? Do we need or not? Do you think that the framework that we are judging is challenging are also a matter of something epistemologically that we have to reevaluate? Or is something that you think, so at what time, at what lab, also we as humans have to make our brain shift to follow this change?
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Jamal, please.
I'd like just to comment and to try to bridge also with the last two panels that we had, starting from the relation between technology and the future of work that we have. Okay, first thing that I'd like to say is that, of course, we are used to think of the future of work in relation with the innovation of technology, with relation to technology, and technology plays
Thank you. I think since we are holding everyone from the drinks, that I would go with a quick rapid-fire comment from each of you.
Yeah, trying to keep together some of the very interesting questions and comments. So, running with Pinocchio again, I checked, and the first Italian translation of Frankenstein was 1944. So I don't think Claudia had read it, but in a sense, Pinocchio is a friendly version of the Frankenstein's monster, so like a creature that escapes its creator's control. I think it's interesting also the question of time, when futurists sort of imagine AI replacing humans, being smarter than humans, and so on and so forth. If we want to speculate about that, there is no telling that they will actually do that those machines will do our bidding. They may very well refuse to work for us and like liberate us from work, and this maybe is also inscribed in Pinocchio, in the tale of Pinocchio. Together with the idea that living labor is what actually generates value and wealth and reproduces society and so on and so forth, which is also Pinocchio becoming a boy and then being able to contribute to society and so on and so forth. And I just want to close by saying that this is this sort of like balance between the fantasies of automation and the awareness of the continuing need for living labor is something I found in the patents that I analyzed in this research project, where I read a few thousand patents that Amazon owns for technologies to be introduced in the warehouse in the future. And these are the objects that Amazon's lawyers and engineers produced, where they inscribe the designs of this company for future technology, right? Basically, Amazon invests billions to produce these patents and to sort of lock in certain technological futures. And you find sentences that could be taken from a labor sociology textbook. Like, I'm quoting almost literally. Automation is great, but human labor is cheaper and more flexible. So for the time being, we're smoothing out the relationship between robots and humans, but forget about completely replacing humans. So this is something that Capital inscribes in the documents it produces, where it stabilizes these sort of desires it has for certain possible technological futures. So maybe Pinocchio also tells us about this contradictory relation between the fantasy of automation and the reality of the need for living labor.
Thank you. I'll just comment very briefly on what Alessandro said about industrial society maybe being a blip, and also a question from the audience about is it a return to the past, or is it an adventure into the future? I remember some have argued, right, when we think about people, when social media came out, like Facebook, etc., the older generations were scandalized about the lack of privacy, right? Like, how could you put all your business online and now everyone will know what the inside of your house looks like, and, you know, all the people you've been with, etc. But some have argued actually that privacy was the blip. A private life was a feature of modern society, where you could live in a city and you could have privacy. Your neighbors didn't know what you were doing, and you had this privilege of anonymity. But when you lived in a rural society, everyone knew everyone's business. It was all very open and apparent, and so privacy was something that we came to care about, but that was the blip, not social media ruining a long established expectation of privacy. So that's something that came to my mind when you were talking about the blip. So yeah, maybe what all the changes that we're going through, we have to consider that what our expectations might have been the blip, and that a lot of things from the past may resurface. So that's one of my comments.
Okay, so let me go out with a bang and just say something extremely controversial, so you can I'll do this. So, a couple of years ago there was a TV show on French TV called The Collapse, which was 8 20-minute episodes about what would happen if France just absolutely collapsed, and it ends with a sort of extinction rebellion, sneaking in a global scientist speaking to a Macron minister. And basically, I'm just going to sort of ventriloquize what the guy says that the show says. So, global catastrophe cannot be averted. It is simply too late. We can, there's no point to talk about 1.5. It is too late. And furthermore, capital has already priced this in a mechanism of reverse Malthusianism, and is planning for a world which 25% of the global population is dead, because of climate emergency, and huge swaths of the globe are uninhabitable. And that's one of the major reasons why telematic machinification is being driven. So for instance, the best 5G network in the world is in the rural regions of China through something called precision agriculture, because China wants to ensure, the great Chinese problem, which is food starvation. And so the reason why we have these things that are developing is because the climate crisis, as Jason Moore says, is a product of Wall Street. And Wall Street has already given up. They have an extremely pessimistic view. We're going to live in a world of 3-degree warming. It will be catastrophic. And much of the preparation that's going on today that's being done under the guise of consumer pleasure is actually a preparation for this world, which there's going to be much less people and much less inhabitable world. And that doesn't matter, because one of the things the capitalist concerns are worried about is things like the Great Resignation, that there are too many people who don't want to do work, and the solution for that is a necropolitical solution, and that's to get rid of people, and that's to get rid of planet, and they're envisioning a world in which there will be pockets of the inhabited, and robots and machines and other telematics will go in and do the mining in South America or whatever that are already radiated or too hot. That's the future of capital.
Good. Excellent. So, meanwhile, I guess the rain has ended, so let's have a drink, at least to forget.